I knew the second my cousin's car pulled into my driveway that trouble wasn't far behind. I'm Aaron Collins, and living under the thumb of the Oakridge Meadows HOA was basically like trying to breathe underwater. You could do it, but barely. And the queen of the HOA? None other than Patricia Whitmore, a middle-aged woman with the permanent scowl and shrillness of a fire alarm. It was supposed to be a chill weekend. My cousin had just gotten back from deployment, and I figured a quiet barbecue was the least I could do. He brought his girlfriend, his buddy, and a cooler big enough to drown a horse in soda and steaks. We hadn't even unloaded half of it when Patricia came marching across my lawn like she was storming the beaches of Normandy. "Excuse me," she barked, hand on her hip, clipboard in the other. "These people need to leave immediately." I dropped the cooler on the porch with a loud thud and turned around slowly. "They're my guests, Patricia." Perfectly allowed. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "You didn't file a guest approval form with the HOA. We have strict visitor policies." I laughed. "There is no visitor policy. I read the bylaws. Maybe you should too." Her face turned a shade of purple I didn't know humans could achieve. She stomped up to my cousin, who was still pulling bags out of his trunk. "You are not authorized to be here," she spat. "If you don't leave in 5 minutes, I will have your vehicle towed and report you for trespassing." My cousin stared at her like she'd grown a second head. His buddy, a guy built like a linebacker, took one step forward, and Patricia actually flinched. "I'm calling the police," she hissed, whipping out her phone. "Good," I said, pulling out my own. "Because I'm calling them too. But I'm calling about you, Patricia." The look on her face was priceless. For the first time ever, she looked unsure. Maybe because she noticed I had cameras installed all over my property, each blinking red like little witnesses. Within 15 minutes, a squad car rolled up. Officer Daniels, a guy I'd met before at a community event, stepped out. He immediately spotted Patricia, who rushed over to him like a damsel in distress. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she shrieked. "These people are causing a disturbance, and this man," she pointed at me like I had robbed a bank, "is harboring unauthorized individuals." Officer Daniels raised an eyebrow and turned to me. "Aaron, what's going on?" I quickly explained, showing him the security footage on my phone where Patricia was seen yelling, threatening, and even trying to block my cousin from getting out of his car. Daniels sighed heavily. "Patricia, step over here." Her mouth flapped open and shut like a fish out of water. She tried to protest, but Daniels cut her off. "You're being charged with harassment. You had no legal authority to threaten guests on private property." If I thought Patricia had turned purple before, this time she went full beet red. Patricia stood rooted to the spot, clutching her clipboard like it might shield her from reality. Officer Daniels motioned for her to follow him to his cruiser, but she hesitated, her jaw working furiously before any sound came out. "You don't understand," she finally blurted. "I am the president of the HOA. I have authority. You have no authority to trespass or threaten private citizens," Daniels interrupted sharply. His voice had the kind of weight that silenced arguments before they could start. "This isn't HOA property. This is his home, his driveway, his guests." My cousin leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, watching with the kind of casual amusement you usually only see at a fireworks show. His buddy, meanwhile, had taken to stacking the cooler and lawn chairs like this was all part of the entertainment. Patricia's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but found none. Eventually, Daniels guided her toward the cruiser. Before she climbed in, she turned her head over her shoulder and hissed, "This isn't over." I lifted one eyebrow but said nothing. There was no need. The situation spoke for itself. After she was secured in the back seat, Daniels came back over. "Mind if I take a look at your security footage in more detail?" he asked. "Of course," I said, leading him toward the porch where the main monitor was set up just inside the front door. As we reviewed the footage, something caught Daniel's attention. He paused the video and zoomed in on a frame where Patricia was flipping through documents on her clipboard. "Can you rewind about 30 seconds? He asked. I did, and we both leaned in. It was subtle, but there it was. A printed list of addresses, including mine with annotations in red ink. Some addresses were circled. Others had notes like, problematic or needs action. Daniels muttered under his breath. That's interesting. I frowned. What does it mean? He straightened up, his face serious. Could be nothing. Could be something. Depends on what she was planning to do with that list. Before he left, he asked if I could email him copies of the footage and any saved images. I agreed, feeling a knot of unease begin to form in my gut. The barbecue went on, but the mood had shifted. My cousin noticed immediately. You think she's been targeting people? He asked, flipping a burger over the grill. Wouldn't surprise me, I said. She's always acted like she owns the whole neighborhood. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing the footage frame by frame. I managed to grab a clear still of the list on Patricia's clipboard. Zooming in, I could make out handwritten notes besides several homes, violation letters pending, fine for trash cans, paint color noncompliance. But what made my blood run cold was the note next to my address, legal action recommended. I forwarded everything to Officer Daniels immediately along with a short message, thought you should see this. The next morning, my doorbell rang just after sunrise. Groggy, I opened it to find Daniels standing there, this time with a second officer and a plainclothes detective. Morning, Aaron, Daniels said. Mind if we come in? I stepped aside, heart pounding. Detective Harris, the plainclothes officer, got straight to the point. We have reason to believe Ms. Whitmore wasn't just overstepping her boundaries. She may have been engaging in coordinated harassment and possibly fraud. I blinked. Fraud. Daniels nodded grimly. We pulled some complaints from other residents after last night. Turns out Patricia's been issuing fake violation fines, collecting payments directly, and pocketing the money. My stomach twisted. You're kidding. Wish I was, Harris said, pulling a small notepad from his jacket. We're talking about thousands of dollars over the past year, mostly from elderly residents who didn't know any better. I sank into the nearest chair, trying to process it. Patricia hadn't just been a nuisance. She was a criminal. We're putting together a formal investigation, Harris continued. Would you be willing to provide a statement? Absolutely, I said without hesitation. They spent the next hour taking my statement, collecting digital copies of the footage, and photographing the printed lists I had saved. Before they left, Harris gave me a card. If anything else comes up or if you hear anything around the neighborhood, call me directly. After they were gone, I sat staring at the card for a long moment before pulling out my phone. I had a few friends around the neighborhood who needed to know what was going on. By noon, a small group had gathered in my backyard. Marcus from 2 houses down, Mrs. Patel from across the street, and the Johnsons, who lived on the corner. I filled them in carefully, sticking to what was confirmed. Mrs. Patel shook her head in disbelief. I thought it was strange when she asked me to pay my fine in cash. Marcus swore under his breath. She fined me $500 last month for landscaping violations. I paid it directly to her. The Johnsons exchanged grim looks. We paid $1,000 for fence infractions. It was worse than I thought. We need to organize, I said. Make sure everyone knows what's going on. No more paying anything directly. No more letting her intimidate people. Mrs. Patel nodded firmly. We should call a meeting, Marcus added. And we need a lawyer. If she's been stealing, the HOA is liable too. I agreed. We set a date for a community meeting 2 nights later, and everyone promised to spread the word quietly. The last thing we needed was Patricia getting wind of it before we were ready. That evening, I drafted a flyer to slip under doors. Community meeting, important updates regarding HOA activities. Private residence. Confidential. I kept it vague but urgent. We had to be smart about this. 2 days later, my backyard was packed. Folding chairs, coolers, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. Even people I barely knew showed up, faces tense and drawn. I stood on an old milk crate to address them. Thanks for coming. Some of you already know part of what's happening. Patricia Whitmore has been using her position to issue fake fines, collect cash payments, and keep the money. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She's been charged with harassment already, I continued. But there's an ongoing investigation into fraud and theft. We need to protect ourselves and each other. A hand shot up. It was Mr. Alvarez, an older gentleman who lived near the park. What can we do? First, I said, no one pays anything directly to her or any board member. Second, document everything. Every letter, every email, every phone call. Third, we're hiring an attorney to represent us as a group. Cheers erupted. It wasn't loud, but it was fierce. One woman, Mrs. Green, stepped forward holding a stack of papers. I printed templates for formal complaints to the state HOA regulatory board, she said. Fill them out tonight. We'll mail them all together tomorrow. People lined up to grab the forms without hesitation. By the end of the night, we had a plan, a class action lawsuit if necessary, a petition to recall the entire HOA board, and backup documentation from nearly every resident. We weren't just fighting Patricia anymore. We were fighting for the soul of our neighborhood. And for once, we were doing it together. The energy in the backyard that night was electric, but not chaotic. People left with a sense of purpose, clutching their complaint forms and swapping phone numbers like soldiers preparing for battle. I stayed back with Marcus, Mrs. Patel, and a couple of others to finalize the plan for the next week. We have to move fast, Marcus said, hands on his hips as he surveyed the empty chairs. If we don't, someone from the board might try to cover for her. Mrs. Patel tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. We'll need certified mail receipts for every complaint we send to the regulatory board. That way they can't claim they didn't get them. I nodded. I'll head to the post office first thing in the morning. Get everything sent out. By the time I finally locked up for the night, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter, almost. Like the whole place had been holding its breath for years and was finally starting to exhale. The next morning, just as I was loading the thick stack of envelopes into my truck, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. Detective Harris stepped out looking more serious than usual. We executed a search warrant on Patricia's house this morning, he said, keeping his voice low. Found more than we expected. I set the box down carefully. How bad? He glanced around before speaking. She's been running a full-scale embezzlement operation. Fake vendors, forged maintenance contracts paid out of HOA dues, even a slush fund. I had to sit down on the porch steps. How much? Preliminary estimate? Over $200,000. I let out a slow breath, trying to wrap my head around it. And it gets worse, Harris continued. We found evidence she was planning to start foreclosure proceedings against multiple homeowners using fabricated code violations. The words hit like a punch to the gut. She was trying to steal people's houses. He nodded grimly. Especially targeting elderly residents who might not have the resources to fight back. I clenched my fists, fury rising. What happens now? She's being held without bail. The district attorney is preparing charges for fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and more. Good, I said, my voice low. And Aaron, Harris added, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. This is a subpoena. We'll need you to testify when the time comes. I took the paper, feeling the weight of it settle into my bones. I'll be there. As Harris drove off, I sat there for a long moment, the sun creeping higher over the rooftops. Patricia had crossed a line so deep there was no coming back. Later that afternoon, word spread like wildfire. Neighbors gathered in small clusters on sidewalks and porches, buzzing with the news. I overheard Mrs. Green telling Mr. Alvarez about the fake vendors. Others speculated about how long it had been going on. By evening, a formal notice was posted on the community bulletin board by the pool. Effective immediately, the Oakridge Meadows HOA board is suspended pending investigation. It was signed by an attorney representing the interim management company appointed by the city. At first glance, it looked like the neighborhood had been liberated. But without a board, chaos crept in quickly. Parking disputes flared up. Landscaping services stopped showing up. Trash collection schedules were missed. For a few days, it felt like we had traded one kind of oppression for anarchy. At the emergency meeting held at the community center, a city-appointed mediator named Ms. Delgado stood before us, clipboard in hand, explaining the next steps. "You will need to elect a provisional board within 30 days, she said. "Until then, essential services will be handled by third-party contractors overseen by my office." She fielded questions for an hour, calm and steady even as tempers flared. When my turn came, I stood and asked, "Will the residents who were defrauded be reimbursed?" Ms. Delgado nodded. "The district attorney is pursuing asset seizure. If successful, recovered funds will be distributed to victims first." A ripple of relief moved through the room. Afterward, Marcus caught up to me in the parking lot. "You running for the new board?" he asked, adjusting his baseball cap. I shook my head. "Not interested in politics. I just want to make sure whoever does run isn't another Patricia." "Fair enough," he said, "but you might want to reconsider. People trust you." That thought stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Neighbors organized cleanup crews. Volunteers painted over graffiti where someone had vandalized the old HOA office. Slowly, a sense of community began to re-emerge, not the fake, forced kind Patricia had tried to impose, but something real. I spent a lot of time helping Mrs. Patel and her husband repair their fence, which had been cited in one of Patricia's fake violations. Turns out it was perfectly fine all along. One evening, as we rested on their porch drinking sweet tea, Mrs. Patel said thoughtfully, "You know, when people are afraid, they don't always see who the real enemy is." I nodded. She counted on that. "Not anymore," she said, raising her glass slightly. A week later, I got a call from Detective Harris. "The grand jury returned an indictment," he said. "Patricia's being charged on 22 counts. Trial date set." He gave me the details, and I started preparing for what would be the final step in this whole mess. The day of the trial dawned gray and rainy, like the weather itself understood the gravity of what was happening. I wore a plain suit, nothing flashy. Just a clean, honest look. Marcus and Mrs. Patel both came to the courthouse for support, along with half a dozen other neighbors. Inside the courtroom, Patricia looked nothing like the woman who used to strut up and down the street with her clipboard. She sat small and pale at the defendant's table, flanked by her lawyers. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and walked to the stand. The prosecutor asked clear, direct questions. I described the harassment of my guests, the threats, the false fines, the clipboard list, the footage I had turned over. Patricia's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination, suggesting I had a personal grudge. But I stayed calm. "You have security cameras on your property?" he asked sharply. "Yes," I said. "And you record all activity?" "Only on my own property, which is legal under state law." He tried to twist my words, but I stuck to the facts. The footage didn't lie. Neither did the paper trail Patricia had left behind in her arrogance. When I stepped down, I caught a glimpse of the jury. They weren't buying her defense. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge ordered immediate remand, and Patricia was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of disbelief. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without the constant fear and surveillance, people actually started talking to each other again. Kids played in the cul-de-sacs without being chased off for unauthorized gatherings. Elderly residents who had been bullied into isolation rejoined community events. At the new board election, a retired teacher named Mr. Reynolds was voted president. He was everything Patricia wasn't: humble, fair, approachable. When I bumped into him on a walk one evening, he clapped me on the back. "You ever change your mind about getting involved?" he said. "There's a seat open for you." I smiled genuinely this time. Maybe someday. For now, it was enough to know that Oakridge Meadows had survived Patricia Whitmore's reign of terror. Not just survived, but come out stronger. And every time I saw kids drawing chalk art on the sidewalks or an old couple planting flowers without fear of a fake fine, I remembered why it had all been worth it. The weeks after Patricia's sentencing brought a strange kind of quiet to Oakridge Meadows. For the first time in years, it felt like the community had a clean slate. But there was still unfinished business left behind by the wreckage she caused. One Saturday morning, sitting at my kitchen counter with a mug of coffee, I got a call from Detective Harris. His voice was more relaxed than usual, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "We wrapped up the audit of the HOA's financials," Harris said. "Turns out Patricia had been doctoring property assessments too, inflating values on select homes to justify higher dues." I leaned forward, wide awake now. "Let me guess. Only certain houses." "Exactly," he said. "Targeted residents she thought couldn't fight back. Elderly, single parents, veterans. You name it. The weight of it hit harder than anything else so far. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. She had picked her victims carefully, betting they would be too isolated or intimidated to resist." "Is there anything we can do about it?" I asked. "The DA's office is pushing for full restitution. Plus, the city's moving to freeze what's left of her assets. It'll take time, but people will get some of their money back." The news offered some comfort, but it still felt hollow. Damage like that didn't just disappear with a refund. After the call ended, I walked the neighborhood, taking it all in. Yards overgrown during the chaos were being trimmed back. Kids rode bikes unbothered. People smiled and waved without the tight, guarded looks they used to wear. Passing Mr. Alvarez's house, I noticed him struggling to load a heavy bag of soil onto a wheelbarrow. I jogged over and grabbed it without a word, setting it down gently. "Gracias, Aaron," he said, wiping his forehead. "Feels good, doesn't it? To be free of all the nonsense." I nodded. "Feels like we can finally breathe." He chuckled. "Feels like we can finally live." Later that afternoon, I headed to the community center where the Provisional Board was holding their first open forum. Mr. Reynolds stood at a modest podium, reading from a folder. The room was packed, but the tension that had once hung heavy over every meeting was gone. "We're not here to control your lives," Reynolds said, voice calm and assured. "We're here to make sure the neighborhood stays safe and fair. Nothing more." He opened the floor to questions, and for the first time, no one shouted or accused. Instead, real concerns were voiced: potholes, broken streetlights, ideas for a summer block party. When it was my turn, I asked about safeguards. "What's being put in place to make sure something like this never happens again?" Reynolds nodded, clearly expecting the question. "We're implementing mandatory audits by an independent firm every year. Open books for any resident to review. No fines or dues increases without a full community vote." The room buzzed with approval. A retired accountant named Mrs. Donnelly, who had volunteered to oversee financial transparency, added, "And no more cash transactions. Ever." Felt like real progress. As the meeting ended, Marcus caught up to me near the coffee table, where someone had laid out cookies and lemonade. "You still sure you don't want a seat on the board?" he asked, grabbing a sugar cookie. "I'm sure," I said, grinning, "but I'll be around, watching." He laughed. "Good enough." Walking home under the late afternoon sun, I realized something else. Patricia's downfall hadn't just freed us from her tyranny, it had forced us to come together in a way we never would have otherwise. The fractures she created had been mended, stronger than before. The following week, I helped organize a neighborhood barbecue, the real kind, not the fake, sterile events Patricia used to host. No sign-in sheets, no clipboard inspections, just music, food, and people enjoying each other's company. Mrs. Patel brought her famous samosas. The Johnsons set up a makeshift lemonade stand their kids ran proudly. Marcus manned the grill, flipping burgers while wearing a ridiculous apron that said, "Grill Sergeant." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting everything in golden light, Mr. Reynolds tapped a spoon against his glass to get everyone's attention. "I just want to say," he began, "this neighborhood went through hell, but we came out stronger. Thanks to all of you, and especially Aaron." I froze as everyone turned toward me, clapping and cheering. I hadn't done it for recognition, but still, something in my chest loosened at the sound. Afterward, as the evening wore on and kids chased fireflies under the street lamps, Mrs. Green pulled me aside. "You know," she said, voice low, "Patricia thought she could control us because she thought we were weak. But she underestimated something important." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She smiled warmly. "When you push people hard enough, you don't break them. You wake them up." The words stayed with me long after the party ended. A few days later, I received a formal letter from the DA's office. Thanks to the asset seizures, every resident who had been defrauded would be reimbursed in full. In some cases, with interest. For many, it wasn't just about the money. It was about justice. Patricia herself faced a long prison sentence. She wouldn't be seeing daylight outside of a prison yard for a very long time. And her name was now permanently attached to a list of disgraced officials barred from ever serving in any HOA or public service position again. One evening, I drove past the old HOA office. Stood empty now, windows dark. Someone had posted a simple handmade sign in the window. "Community belongs to everyone." I smiled and kept driving. In the months that followed, Oakridge Meadows flourished. New families moved in, drawn by the spirit of the community rather than the manicured lawns. The playground was renovated, a community garden was started, and plans for a small library box were underway. There were still disagreements, of course. No place is perfect. But now, when issues came up, they were handled with respect and transparency, not threats and intimidation. One evening, sitting on my porch with a cold drink in hand, I watched as my cousin and his girlfriend pulled up for another visit. This time, there were no clipboard-wielding tyrants to chase them off, just neighbors waving as they passed. My cousin stepped out of the car and looked around, taking in the peaceful scene. "Place looks different," he said. "It is," I replied. "Lot of hard work. Lot of good people." He nodded, tossing a football to his buddy, who had tagged along again. As laughter and music floated through the air from another backyard barbecue a few houses down, I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the kind that comes from silence or isolation, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood up when it counted. That you fought for something bigger than yourself and won. Patricia Whitmore had tried to turn Oakridge Meadows into her kingdom. But when push came to shove, the people she underestimated proved stronger than she ever imagined. And as I sat there, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors who had become something closer to a family, I knew one thing for sure. We would never let fear rule us again.